The wedding that froze. The priest's voice falters mid-sentence, as though a thread has snapped in the middle of a hymn. You stand among rows of glittering guests, silk rustling, camera flashes pulsing like nervous heartbeats. Everything stops. The groom's smile stiffens. The bride's hand, perfectly manicured, trembling beneath her veil, tightens around her bouquet. And then everyone sees it. At the far end of the aisle, just behind the flower arch, the maid stands half-shadowed, clutching a tray of champagne glasses that shimmer under the stained glass light. One of her shoes, dull brown and frayed at the seams, is covered in streaks of mud. It looks grotesquely out of place against the marble floor. The bride's laughter breaks the silence first. Oh my God. Look at her shoes. It's not kind laughter. It ripples through the crowd like spilled wine, staining everything it touches. Guests glance at each other, unsure whether to smile or look away. A few phones rise discreetly. People pretend to check notifications, but tilt their lenses toward the maid instead. You can hear the murmur. Is she the maid? Why is she even in here? The priest clears his throat. Let's continue, he says softly, but his eyes haven't left the maid. His tone is no longer ceremonial. It's careful, uncertain, like a man sensing that something is terribly wrong beneath the surface. The maid lowers her gaze. Her name is Mara, though few in this crowd have ever asked. Her uniform is pressed, her posture proud, but the way her fingers tremble around that tray betrays the storm inside her. The muddy shoe isn't from carelessness. It's from running, somewhere urgent, moments before the ceremony began. But that's not what the guests see. They see poverty interrupting perfection. The bride, Evelyn Harcourt, daughter of a real estate tycoon, leans toward her bridesmaids. Did she just walk through a field or something? She whispers loudly enough for half the pews to hear. Her voice drips with champagne confidence, laughter again, polite, nervous, complicit, and then a sound breaks it all. A single glass slips from Mara's tray and shatters on the tile. The echo rings through the church like a bell toll. The priest pauses. The groom's brow tightens, and for one fleeting second, the camera flash captures Mara's face perfectly. Wide eyes, lips parted, and something unreadable in her expression. Not fear, not shame. Something quieter, deeper. She kneels, begins collecting the shards, her movement steady despite the whispers. A droplet of blood blooms on her fingertip, small but vivid. No one offers a handkerchief. No one bends to help. Only the priest moves. He steps from the altar, his white robes catching the candlelight. Miss, he says gently, are you hurt? Mara shakes her head. It's just glass, Father. Her voice is soft, accented faintly. Maybe Caribbean, maybe Southern, the kind of tone city people imitate but never quite understand. She stands, clutching the broken pieces in her hand like they mean something. Evelyn crosses her arms, smirking. Maybe she's hoping the groom will clean it up for her too. The guests chuckle, but the priest doesn't smile. His eyes shift, not toward the bride, but toward the groom's mother's empty chair near the front row, draped with white roses and a folded photograph. For a second, his expression darkens, confusion. Recognition? The organist fumbles the keys nervously, unsure whether to resume playing. The entire church feels suspended, like everyone's trapped inside a held breath. Then, in the hush, the maid looks up, directly at the priest, and something in her gaze stops him cold. You shouldn't start, she says softly. A few guests gasp. The audacity. A maid interrupting a ceremony? Evelyn's face flushes. Excuse me? You don't tell us when to start. You're just the... But the priest lifts a hand, silencing her. He turns to Mara. Why shouldn't we? Mara's lips tremble, but there's a strange calm behind them too. Because the bride's vow would be built on someone else's promise. The room goes still. The what? Evelyn laughs incredulously, but her voice wavers now. Mara glances at the empty chair again. She wouldn't want it this way, she whispers, barely audible. The priest's face changes, recognition flooding in. The guests lean forward. The bride frowns, snapping, Who are you even talking about? But the priest's answer cuts through like a blade. The groom's mother. he says quietly. She said those exact words to me the week before she passed. Every sound in the chapel dies. The faint hum of the lights, the organ's breath, even the murmuring phones. Gone. Mara's eyes glisten. She opens her hand. A drop of blood slides from her finger onto the marble, next to a shard of glass that catches the light like a tiny mirror. And in its reflection, you see everything. Wealth, ceremony, arrogance, and beneath it all, a secret begging to be told. The bride swallows hard. "This is ridiculous," she says, her voice thinner now. "Can we please?" But the priest doesn't move. His eyes stay locked on Mara. "Child," he says softly, "where did you get those shoes?" Mara looks down. The muddy leather creaks as she shifts her weight. "They were a gift, Father," she says. "From whom?" Her answer is quiet, deliberate, chilling. From her. And for a heartbeat, no one breathes. The bride's smile fades completely. The groom looks between them, pale as paper. Somewhere near the back, a guest whispers, "What does she mean from her?" The organist's hand hovers uncertain. The priest slowly closes his Bible. He looks at the maid one last time and says, "Then this wedding cannot continue." Glass crunches beneath her heel as she steps back, lowering her eyes. Outside, thunder rolls in the distance, soft, promising. The silence that follows is absolute. 2 hours earlier, the world looked flawless. The mansion glowed like a diamond under morning sun, all glass walls, marble floors, and roses imported from Ecuador. You could smell money in the air, that mix of perfume, polished oak, and power. The Harcourt estate wasn't hosting a wedding. It was hosting a performance. Inside the dressing suite, laughter clinked like champagne. Evelyn Harcourt, radiant in satin and certainty, posed before a wall-length mirror as her bridesmaids fawned. Her makeup artist dabbed her cheekbones until they glowed like pearl. Her mother fussed over details. "Smile, darling. Remember, this will be in the society pages." At her feet knelt Mara, the maid. She moved silently, straightening the hem of the bride's gown. Her hands were steady, her steps small, as if she knew her very existence in that room was tolerated, not welcomed. The only sound from her was the faint scuff of her shoes, brown, scuffed, loyal survivors from another life. Evelyn caught the sound and smirked. "Mara, honestly, you couldn't find better shoes for my wedding." Laughter rippled through the bridesmaids. One of them, a tall blonde named Courtney, added, "Maybe they're sentimental. Maybe they walked her out of a thrift store sale." Even the makeup artist chuckled under her breath. Mara didn't answer. She simply adjusted the veil, eyes down, like someone who's learned silence can be armor. But Evelyn wasn't done. She turned toward her phone, recording a story for her followers. "Okay, everyone, moment of gratitude," she announced, pointing the camera toward Mara. "This is our lovely maid who insists on working today even though her footwear situation is tragic." The camera panned down. The comments began pinging instantly on screen. "OMG, what are those?" "At least she's humble. Rich people cosplay poor staff now." Evelyn giggled, tossing her hair. "It's okay," she said mock-sincerely. "Not everyone's meant for heels." The room erupted again, and for a split second you could see something shift in Mara's face. Not anger, not shame, but memory. A flash of something older, heavier. She quietly folded the train into place, stepped back, and said softly, "Some shoes walk longer roads than others." The room went silent for a beat. Evelyn blinked, unamused. "Excuse me?" Mara smiled faintly. "Nothing, ma'am, just making sure you can stand steady." The faintest trace of sarcasm, like a hairline crack in perfect glass, Evelyn frowned. "You're paid to serve, not speak." Mara nodded, gathering her cleaning cloths. "Yes, ma'am." She turned to leave, but something silver gleamed on the vanity table, a locket, intricate and old-fashioned, shaped like a heart but etched with initials. L.H. Evelyn noticed it too. "Oh, that's from his mother," she said casually. "Some ancient heirloom. She wore it to every church service, apparently. I'm supposed to wear it for good luck, but it doesn't go with the look. she laughed, dropping it carelessly into a drawer. A soft clink. Mara hesitated. Her eyes lingered on the drawer, her fingers twitching slightly. You could tell she recognized it. Not the gold, but the engraving. Later, when no one was looking, she slipped it into her pocket. Not to steal. To remember. Outside, thunderclouds gathered faintly on the horizon, though the forecast promised a clear day. Evelyn's father entered then, Mr. Harcourt, crisp suit, booming voice. "Everything ready?" "The governor's already en route." "Perfectly," Evelyn said, turning toward him. "Except for a small fashion emergency." She gestured at Mara. "Someone forgot she's not part of the aesthetic." Mr. Harcourt chuckled. "Well, every fairy tale needs contrast. Keeps the photos humble." He patted Mara's shoulder, too firm to be kind. "Good job, sweetheart. Make sure the bride shines. People like you make events like this possible. People like you." Mara lowered her head. "Yes, sir." But behind her polite tone, something stirred. A flicker of defiance, quiet but unyielding. The bridesmaids turned away, gossiping about hashtags and honeymoon destinations. No one noticed Mara pause by the window, gazing out toward the garden where the ceremony would take place. Her reflection hovered beside Evelyn's in the glass. Two women in white and brown. Privilege and service. Beauty and endurance. If anyone had looked closely, they'd have seen the smallest of smiles cross her lips. Not bitterness. Understanding. People still argue whether that moment was courage or prophecy. Whether she already knew what was about to unravel before noon. Evelyn's laughter floated again. "Make sure she stays out of my pictures, okay? We want luxury, not laundry." Mara turned, quietly tucking the locket into her uniform pocket. "Don't worry," she murmured. "Truth doesn't need a spotlight. No one caught it." Not yet. The photographers arrived. The music rehearsed. Guests began pulling up in black cars that gleamed like mirrors. And in the middle of it all, a single maid walked barefoot for a moment in the garden mud to retrieve a fallen veil before it stained, her shoes sinking, one heel breaking slightly. That's how they got muddy. That's how everything began to unravel. By the time the first bell tolled and the guests filled the pews, the locket pressed cold against Mara's heart. She whispered to herself. "A promise, more prayer than threat. I'll return it when truth fits." And somewhere above the glittering glass ceiling of that mansion, thunder rolled again, faint but getting closer. The church bells hadn't started yet when Mara arrived at the old stone chapel. Breathless, mud on her shoes, the silver locket warm against her chest. Inside, volunteers bustled, florists fixing ribbons, ushers checking programs. Everything looked pure and perfect, but you could feel it. That invisible hum before a storm. Evelyn's wedding coordinator spotted Mara right away. "You're late," she snapped, glancing at the dirty shoes. "And what happened to those?" "You can't be seen like that." "I'll stay in the back," Mara said calmly. Adjusting her uniform. "Stay out of sight," the woman corrected, then turned away. The words rolled off her, harmless as raindrops. She'd been told worse before. As the clock ticked closer to noon, Mara found herself alone for a moment in the vestry, the tiny room behind the altar filled with incense and candle wax. On the wall hung framed photos of previous ceremonies, couples smiling under the same arch, the same priest blessing their futures. But one picture caught her eye, a young woman in a lace veil, gentle eyes, same locket shining at her throat. Lydia Harcourt, the groom's mother. The handwriting beneath the photo read, "May truth outlive pride." Mara exhaled softly. The memory came rushing back, the soft humming of hymns, the smell of lavender, the kind hands that had once braided her hair while she worked nights caring for Lydia during her final illness. "Don't ever let them tell you you're less." "Child," Lydia used to say, voice thin but bright. "Blood and money fade. Character doesn't." She'd laughed then, a gentle, wheezy sound. "And if they forget that, let truth find its way back. It always does." That was months before she died. And before the letter disappeared, Mara touched the locket in her pocket. It had been Lydia's, but somehow it had resurfaced among Evelyn's bridal trinkets, which meant someone in the Harcourt house had taken it, or hidden it. Outside the vestry door, the sound of polished shoes and chatter grew louder. Guests were arriving. She peeked through a small side window. The pews filled with society's elite, local politicians, business magnates, women with pearls thick as hope. The organ warmed up, playing something elegant and slow. She caught sight of the groom, Daniel Harcourt, solemn, handsome, but visibly tense. The kind of man who smiled without letting it reach his eyes. His tie was perfect. His gaze was not. When he looked toward the front pew, toward his mother's memorial seat, his expression softened, briefly, then hardened again when his father approached. Whispering something sharp, Mara could read lips. Years of quiet observation had taught her that skill. She saw Mr. Harcourt mouth the words, "Just say the vows." The rest is business. Business. That's what love was to them. Another merger, another image to polish for the press. Mara's stomach tightened. She knew what was in that locket, or at least what had once been there. Lydia's handwritten note folded small, sealed inside, for Daniel, when truth must speak louder than I can. She'd found the locket by chance that morning when Evelyn mocked her, the same locket she'd once polished carefully for Lydia years ago. It had felt like fate pulling her sleeve. A knock on the vestry door jolted her. It was the priest, Father Gabriel, gentle eyes behind round glasses. He looked startled to see her. "Mara," he said softly. "It's been years." She nodded, smiling faintly. "You remember me, Father? How could I forget? You were at Mrs. Harcourt's bedside every night." "I promised her I'd be here today," Mara said, her tone low but firm. He studied her face, then the mud-streaked shoes. "You've come a long way to keep that promise?" Mara hesitated. "She said truth always finds its way back." Father Gabriel looked at her a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then quietly he said, "Then maybe truth has good timing." Before she could reply, voices echoed down the corridor. Evelyn's laughter again, high, glittering, oblivious. "Make sure the priest mentions my mother-in-law in the blessing. It'll look gracious," she said to someone. "Oh, and tell the maid to stay outside during the ceremony. She's bad luck." Mara straightened her back. When the laughter faded, she whispered to Father Gabriel, "If she says her vows today, she's swearing over a lie." He frowned. "What do you mean?" Mara took out the locket, opening it slightly. Inside, folded tight, was a single yellowed note sealed with faint wax. "This," she said, "wasn't meant for her." Father Gabriel's brows furrowed. "You've read it?" She shook her head. "No, Father. It's not my place." "Then why bring it?" "Because lies rot faster in silence." He looked at her shoes again, at the mud, the fray, the quiet dignity in her stance. "You remind me of her," he said. "Maybe I just never stopped listening," Mara replied softly. Outside, bells began to toll. Father Gabriel took the locket from her carefully, his hand trembling. "Then let's see if today," he murmured. "Truth still knows the way to the altar." As the music swelled and the bride began her slow walk down the aisle, Mara slipped into the last pew, half hidden behind a column, her uniform crisp, her hands steady, her eyes fixed on the altar. She could feel the weight of the room, the eyes, the performance of purity. But she also felt something else, a quiet shift in the air, like destiny waiting for its cue. And when the priest's voice cracked mid-vow 2 hours later, and the locket glinted under the church light, no one remembered the laughter or the shoes. They only remembered the silence that came next. Before the locket, before the laughter, there was only work. Years ago, Mara had lived in a small guest house behind the Harcourt estate. The kind of place built for staff, barely wide enough for a bed and a prayer, but filled with the scent of detergent and resilience. Every morning she'd wake before dawn, light a candle, and press her uniform with the same care others saved for Sunday best. Her hands always smelled faintly of lavender oil, Lydia Harcourt's favorite. Back then, Lydia wasn't just the groom's mother. She was the only person in that mansion who said thank you. Mara had arrived as a live-in nurse's aide, a position most people turned down because Lydia's illness frightened them. A degenerative heart condition, the kind that made breathing a labor and laughter a luxury. Yet even while confined to bed, Lydia carried herself with grace. She'd hum gospel songs, paint tiny birds on scrap paper, and talk to Mara like an equal. "Child," she'd say, "the world will call you by your work before it calls you by your name. Don't let them decide which matters more." Those words had stayed. Mara had no family of her own. Her mother died when she was 16. Her father disappeared somewhere between debts and dreams. So when Lydia Harcourt began to trust her, to truly talk, Mara listened like a daughter. Late one night, when the machines beeped too slowly and the storm outside clawed at the windows, Lydia asked Mara to open the wooden chest by her bedside. Inside were papers, photographs, and one sealed envelope. "If I don't wake up tomorrow," Lydia whispered, "this letter goes to Daniel." Mara froze. "I'll make sure of it." But Lydia shook her head weakly. "Not yet. Not until it's needed. You'll know when that time comes." The next morning, Lydia was gone. The family called it a peaceful passing. The press printed tributes. Evelyn, then just Daniel's new fiancée, posted a photo captioned, "Heaven gained an angel," and "I'll honor her legacy." But Mara knew something didn't feel right. 2 days later, while packing Lydia's belongings, Mara searched for that sealed envelope, the one she'd promised to protect. It wasn't in the chest. It wasn't anywhere. When she asked Mr. Harcourt about it, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "There was no letter," he said. "Perhaps you imagined it." But Mara hadn't imagined the wax seal, the trembling hand that pressed it into hers. She remembered every word Lydia had whispered. "Truth must speak louder than I can." That night, Mara's employment was terminated. No reason given, just a polite dismissal and a week's wages. She packed quietly, left her room spotless, and slipped away before dawn. For months, she tried to move on, working as a cleaner in downtown offices, saving every dollar. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw that letter. People in town still whispered about the Harcourts, about how quickly the estate passed into Daniel's control, about how his fiancée, Evelyn, started managing family charities, the ones Lydia had founded. Funds went missing. Records changed. Lydia's portrait disappeared from the main hall. Mara never spoke of it. But when she walked past St. Augustine Church, the same chapel where Lydia had been baptized, she'd pause at the steps. And sometimes she thought she heard the woman's voice again. Truth finds its way back. That's why when she was assigned as a temp maid for Evelyn's wedding, she almost didn't accept. She didn't believe in coincidences. But something inside whispered, "Go, watch, wait." And when she saw that silver locket glinting on the vanity, the same locket Lydia used to wear every Sunday, her heart nearly stopped. It had returned to her, just as promised. The day before the wedding, Mara sat in her small apartment, turning it over in her palm. The clasp had a faint seam. Inside, sealed with aging wax, was a folded note. She hadn't opened it. She couldn't. Instead, she whispered to it. If she trusted me to carry it, she must have trusted me to know when to deliver it. People still debate whether Mara knew exactly what the letter contained, whether she had already guessed the secret that would halt the wedding. Some say she must have suspected it was about inheritance. Others believe it carried something more human, forgiveness, confession, or both. That night, as the rain tapped against her window, Mara cleaned her old shoes, rubbed them dry, and set them beside her bed. They were all she had left from her mother, who'd once said, "Shoes remember the miles you walked to keep your dignity." So yes, they were old. But they fit, and when the morning came, she put them on again, tied them tight, and whispered, "Today's the road she meant." Then she went to work. The mansion glowed that morning like it had never known sorrow. The staff lined up, the photographers rehearsed angles, the caterers whispered about celebrity guests. And in the middle of that glossy perfection, Mara felt something stirring, not fear, not pride, but closure waiting to bloom. When Evelyn's laughter later filled that bridal suite, cruel, careless, golden, Mara didn't flinch. She looked at the locket in her pocket and thought, this is the moment she meant, because sometimes poetic justice doesn't need revenge. It only needs patience. The church bells began to toll at noon, deep, rolling, deliberate. Inside St. Augustine's, sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting the marble floor with ribbons of crimson and gold. Every seat was filled. The air shimmered with perfume and curiosity. At the front, the groom, Daniel Harcourt, stood tall, adjusting his cufflinks for the third time. He looked immaculate, but his eyes betrayed a faint restlessness. Beside him, Evelyn floated down the aisle in white silk that shimmered like liquid light, her veil gliding behind her like smoke. The choir's hymn swelled. Cameras clicked. Guests sighed, but at the far corner, near the entrance, one figure didn't move. Mara, the maid, clutching a small bouquet of forgotten flowers. She had been asked to stand discreetly in case anything needed cleaning during the ceremony. The irony wasn't lost on her. From her corner, she could see everything. The trembling of the bride's hands, the proud stiffness in the groom's father's jaw, the faint shadow that crossed the priest's face as he opened his Bible. "Dearly beloved," Father Thomas began, his voice calm but weighted. "We are gathered here today." Mara bowed her head, but her eyes never left the altar. As the vows began, something shifted in the air. Not in the words themselves, but in the silence that followed them. The priest looked down at the marriage registry, the thick, embossed ledger every couple signed before exchanging rings. His brows knit together. He turned a page, then another. Daniel's signature wasn't there. The bride blinked, her smile faltering. "Father?" The priest's tone softened, but his hand didn't move from the book. "It seems the groom's declaration has not been recorded. Did you both sign this morning, as instructed?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes, I thought I did." Father Thomas's eyes lingered on him. "Perhaps you'd step aside with me for a moment." Whispers rippled through the pews. Cameras lowered. The organ's hum stilled mid-note. Mara's pulse quickened. Her gaze dropped to the locket in her apron pocket, still sealed, still burning with invisible weight. The priest motioned for Daniel to join him in the vestry. Evelyn followed halfway before being stopped gently by an usher. The congregation murmured louder. "What's happening?" someone whispered. "Is the document invalid?" Another guessed. Minutes passed. The choir began humming softly to cover the unease. Evelyn forced a laugh, tossing her veil over one shoulder. "Technicality, everyone!" "You know how priests are with their papers." But her voice quivered. Mara watched her. There was something almost fragile behind that arrogance, the kind of fear that only power can hide. When the priest and Daniel returned, Father Thomas's expression was different. Pale, deliberate, he addressed the audience quietly. "Before we continue, there is a matter of conscience we must resolve." Evelyn stiffened. "Father, can this not wait?" "We have hundreds of guests," he raised a hand. "The sanctity of marriage waits for no man or woman when truth stands at its door." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the candles seemed to flicker slower. Father Thomas turned to Mara. "Miss, you there? The maid. Would you please approach the altar?" Every head turned. The world tilted. Mara froze. Evelyn's eyes went sharp as glass. "What? Why her?" The priest gestured again, kindly but firmly. "Because, child, she carries something that belongs to the church, and perhaps to this family." Mara's hands trembled as she stepped forward, each footstep echoing louder than it should have. She reached into her pocket and drew out the silver locket, glinting under the stained glass light. "I was keeping this safe," she said softly. "It belonged to Mrs. Lydia Harcourt." A gasp ran through the room. Daniel took a half step forward. "My mother's?" Mara nodded, eyes glistening. "She gave it to me the night before she passed." She said I'd know when it was needed. I believe that time is now. Father Thomas extended his hand, but she didn't give it yet. Instead, she whispered, "There's something inside." I never opened it. But it was meant for you. He hesitated, as if even the air around them understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. The bride's laughter returned, brittle and shrill. "This is ridiculous. She's a maid, Father. My mother-in-law probably gave her that as charity. She's trying to ruin my day." But the priest didn't move. The truth cannot ruin what is sacred, only reveal what was hidden. Finally, Mara placed the locket into his palm, and for the first time that day, Evelyn's smile cracked. The priest looked down at the tiny hinge. The wax seal had an imprint, a pressed rose, the same symbol Lydia used on her private letters. He didn't open it yet. Instead, he turned toward the altar, raising his voice just enough for everyone to hear. "This ceremony cannot proceed until this message is read." A stunned murmur swelled through the church like thunder. Rolling in the distance, Mara closed her eyes. The story had finally caught up to its secret. The church seemed to hold its breath. Even the flickering candles along the marble walls burned straighter, as if afraid to sway. Father Thomas stood before the congregation, the silver locket glinting in his hand, its wax seal catching the sunlight like a ruby drop. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. Evelyn's voice sliced the silence. "Father, this is madness. Whatever that is, it's ancient family junk. This is our wedding, not some scavenger hunt for—" But her voice cracked before she could finish, because Father Thomas had already broken the seal. Inside the locket was a folded strip of silk, faintly perfumed, yellowed at the edges. The priest unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting inside was small, feminine, but firm. His lips moved as he read the first line silently. Then his face changed, the kind of change that doesn't happen to expressions but to souls. He looked up at Daniel. "My son, would you please come here?" Daniel stepped forward, unsure whether his legs were carrying him or the weight of something larger than himself. Evelyn stood frozen behind him, her hands clasped so tightly that the lace of her gloves tore. The priest's voice lowered, but it carried through the vaulted space. "This letter is addressed to you, Daniel, from your late mother. It was written 3 months before her passing." The room fell utterly still. The only sound was the ticking of the church clock. Slow, deliberate, merciless. Father Thomas began to read. "My dearest Daniel, if this finds you on your wedding day, it means the truth I could not say in life has finally demanded to be heard. You were raised to value names, wealth, and reputation, things your father worshipped. But there is something you were never told. The woman who has served this household the longest, Mara's mother, once saved your father's life." A ripple ran through the crowd. Daniel blinked, confused. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "In those years, when your father's business crumbled and creditors hounded our door, she sold everything she owned, even her home, to pay the debt that kept our family from ruin. Your father promised to repay her." "He never did," a murmur swelled. Daniel's breath caught. He turned slowly toward Mara, who stood small and trembling, her eyes wet with disbelief. "So if one day her daughter should stand before you, never forget that you owe her more than gratitude. You owe her your life. Treat her as kin, for she carries the debt of our family's honor. And if you ever forget, this locket will remind you." When Father Thomas stopped reading, silence swallowed the church whole. Then someone whispered from the back, "Her mother saved the Harcourts?" Evelyn's face drained of color. This is insane." She turned sharply to Daniel. "You're not believing this, are you?" "She's just a maid." "Probably forged it to make you pity her." Father Thomas's voice cut through, low but sharp. "This letter bears Mrs. Harcourt's official seal, the same one kept in the parish archives." "This is no forgery." Daniel's chest rose and fell, eyes locked on Mara. In that moment, memory crashed into him, flashes of childhood, his mother's hand on his head, her voice saying, "Never turn away a hand that once fed you." He thought it was just a proverb, but it was a warning. Evelyn, still desperate, tried to laugh. So what? Her mother helped yours. That doesn't change who she is now, a servant. Are you really going to let a dead woman's words humiliate us in front of everyone? The priest turned his gaze toward her, calm but unflinching. What humbles us is not the truth, my child. It is how we resist it. Laughter bubbled from a few guests, nervous, uncertain. But then something subtle shifted in Daniel's expression. He walked toward Mara. She took a half-step back, unsure whether to bow or flee. But he stopped halfway, looking at the locket, then back at her. My mother trusted you with this, he said quietly. That means she trusted you with everything. Mara's lip quivered. I only kept it safe, sir. That's all. The priest closed the locket and placed it on the altar. No, child. You kept a promise when everyone else forgot one, Evelyn snapped. Enough of this. Father, continue the ceremony. This melodrama is making us look foolish? But Father Thomas didn't move. Instead, he asked, Daniel, before we proceed, I must ask again, in full conscience, do you wish to continue these vows? The groom's silence was heavier than any answer. His eyes flicked to Evelyn, gleaming diamonds, clenched jaw, and then to Mara, trembling hands, worn shoes, and an honesty that didn't need defending. He opened his mouth to speak, but Evelyn cut in first. Don't even think about it. You've already embarrassed me enough. My family, your family? He interrupted softly. Evelyn, do you even know what family means anymore? The crowd gasped, not because of the words, but the tone. Calm, final. He stepped back from her. This isn't about embarrassment. It's about debt, about truth. My mother's dying wish deserves to be honored. Evelyn laughed, too loudly, too shrill. You're really ending our wedding over a maid's trinket? Daniel's eyes hardened. No, I'm ending it because I finally understand what kind of man my mother raised me not to be. The silence after that line was absolute. Evelyn stood frozen for a heartbeat, then turned sharply under her heels echoing down the aisle as she stormed toward the exit. Reporters outside swarmed her before the church doors even closed. Inside, the priest whispered something to Daniel, too softly for others to hear. Daniel nodded once, eyes glassy but resolute. Mara stepped back, trembling. I never meant to cause... He stopped her with a shake of his head. You didn't cause this, Mara. You just showed everyone what was already broken. The priest closed the Bible gently. Perhaps then it's time we speak not of a wedding lost, but a legacy found. Some guests began to applaud, softly at first, unsure if they were allowed to. But when Daniel placed the locket into Mara's hands and whispered, "Thank you," even the organist wiped her eyes. Still, one question lingered like smoke in the rafters. What exactly had Lydia Harcourt owed Mara's mother? And how deep did that debt go? Because in the corner of the letter, Father Thomas noticed something everyone else had missed. A faint watermark, not just a letter, a legal document. The real storm hadn't even begun. The organ's final note hung in the air, trembling like a heartbeat before silence. The guests had stopped whispering. No one even shifted in their seats. Daniel stood frozen near the altar, the priest's words still echoing in his mind. A legacy found, but the phrase carried more weight than anyone realized. Father Thomas turned the silk paper over carefully, smoothing its folds beneath the soft light of the stained glass. That's when he saw it, faint but deliberate, embossed lettering that glinted under the sunbeam cutting through the window. A notary seal. He blinked once, twice. His breath caught. This is not just a letter, he murmured, voice almost reverent. This is a codicil, an amendment to Mrs. Harcourt's will. Gasps broke through the stillness like cracks in glass. Daniel's head snapped toward him. What? Evelyn, who had stopped halfway to the door, turned back. You're joking. Father Thomas didn't respond. He stepped closer to the altar and unfolded the silk fully. The ink, though faded, bore legal language, unmistakable. In the event that my son Daniel should marry under false pretenses or be deceived by vanity, The trust and estate of the Harcourt name shall remain frozen until an act of moral restitution is fulfilled. That restitution is defined as the restoration of debt owed to the family of Miss Eliza Green, now deceased, and her surviving child, Mara Green. The words rang through the cathedral like a bell of judgment. Evelyn's laughter came out brittle. "You're not seriously telling me, what, that the maid gets the estate now? This is absurd!" The priest's gaze didn't waver. "I am telling you what your would-be mother-in-law decreed." Her estate lawyer sealed this document. "It bears the parish seal and the signature of the late Judge Halverson. Both valid." Daniel stepped forward slowly as though walking into another life. "You mean to tell me everything? The company, the inheritance, the estate? It's all tied to her family's debt?" Father Thomas nodded once. "Until it is repaid, or until her name is restored with the same public dignity that was once stripped from it." For a moment, no one breathed. The reporters outside had sensed the shift. Through the open doors, camera flashes began bursting like lightning. Evelyn's voice pitched into desperation. "Daniel, stop listening to this nonsense. You don't owe her anything! She's been using pity to manipulate..." But Daniel's tone was calm. "No, Evelyn, for once, I think I owe everything." The priest gently placed the letter back into the locket. "It seems, Daniel, your mother's sense of justice extends beyond the grave." Mara's knees nearly buckled. "Father, please, and this isn't right. I never wanted..." "Child," he interrupted softly. "Wanting justice and deserving it are not always the same. Your mother gave everything to this family. It seems heaven, and Mrs. Harcourt, decided it was time the scales balanced." A nervous cough echoed from the pews. The Harcourt family lawyer, a gray-haired man named Sinclair, rose hesitantly. "If I may, Father Thomas, as I handled Mrs. Harcourt's estate. There was a sealed document, yes, one she insisted be delivered only upon her son's wedding. The church stirred like a hive awakening. She never told me what it was," Sinclair continued, his voice quivering. "But she said it would determine whether the Harcourt name was worthy of its own fortune." The priest nodded. "Then today's discovery fulfills her will." Evelyn stepped forward, her heels clicking furiously on marble. "This is ridiculous. That letter could mean anything. You're twisting her words to..." Sinclair raised a trembling hand. Mrs. Harcourt's meaning was clear. "If Daniel marries in arrogance," she said, "his inheritance shall humble itself first." Those were her exact words. A ripple of laughter. Incredulous. Awkward swept through the guests. Evelyn's face turned crimson. "So what now? The maid gets a mansion? Shall we all clap for Cinderella while you strip me of my wedding dress?" No one answered. Instead, Daniel approached Mara, slowly, like approaching the truth he'd spent his whole life avoiding. "Mara," he said quietly, "your mother's kindness kept my family from losing everything, and my mother tried in her own way to repay it. She must have trusted you to bring this to light." Mara shook her head, her voice breaking. "I didn't even know what it was, Daniel. I swear I didn't come here to expose anything. I only came to serve, to do my job." He gave a small, sad smile. "Then you've done far more than that," Evelyn scoffed. "Touching. Maybe she'll clean your conscience next." The line was cruel, but no one laughed this time. Even Evelyn felt it, the cold isolation that comes when mockery no longer has an audience. Father Thomas turned to her gently. "My child, humility is not the loss of status. It is the recovery of truth. You may still find it, if you stop running from it." Evelyn's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Then Sinclair cleared his throat. "There's one more thing. Mrs. Harcourt also instructed that upon discovery of this document, her foundation would be restructured. The Green family would become co-beneficiaries until the original debt's equivalent value was restored, with interest." Mara froze. "That can't be. I don't even have..." "You do now," the lawyer interrupted. "You're the rightful heir of the restitution trust. The Harcourt estate cannot move a cent until your signature validates the repayment clause." The church erupted in astonishment. Guests gasped, cameras flashed, reporters rushed the steps. Evelyn covered her face, mortified, but Father Thomas only smiled faintly, a weary, knowing smile. People often say wealth reveals character. I've always thought it tests it. Daniel turned to Mara again, eyes heavy but sincere. Maybe this isn't the ending we expected, but it might be the one we needed. And in that suspended moment, between humiliation and revelation, the faintest smile touched Mara's lips. Not triumph, just quiet relief. Still in the back of the church, someone moved, a shadow slipping away unnoticed. A man in a dark suit, his face half hidden. He had been recording the entire event on his phone, and as he left, he whispered under his breath, "Wait until the press hears what the Harcourts did to her mother." The past, it seemed, was far from finished. Outside St. Augustine's, the church steps had turned into a battlefield of camera flashes and microphones. The headlines were already being written before the ink of revelation had even dried inside. Bride shamed by priest, Harcourt wedding halted over secret will. Maid becomes unexpected heir, but inside, the air was quieter, heavier, like the echo of a confession no one had expected to make. Daniel still stood before the altar. The letter sealed again inside its locket, the crowd murmuring like waves. Mara lingered near the front pew, unsure whether to run or bow. She was no longer just the maid in old shoes. She was the daughter of the woman who had saved a dynasty. Father Thomas adjusted his glasses and turned to the Harcourt lawyer. "Mr. Sinclair, would you please stay? There may be one last matter to settle." Sinclair nodded, his trembling hands fumbling with the briefcase he carried, the same one that held the master copy of the Harcourt Trust. Evelyn stood rigid near the aisle, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. "You can't possibly be entertaining this circus any longer, Father. You've embarrassed us, He looked at her calmly. "The truth embarrasses no one, child. It only unmasks them." Her lips pressed into a line of fury, but she said nothing more. The priest turned to Mara, his tone softening. "Do you understand what this means, my dear? Your mother's debt was not just financials, it was moral. This locket is more than a claim. It's a mirror." Mara swallowed hard. I don't want their money. I just want her name back." Daniel stepped forward. "Then let's do that first." He turned to the guests, his voice strong but shaking at the edges. "All my life, I believe my family's legacy was built on hard work and integrity. But today, I learned it was built on someone else's sacrifice, one we buried in silence. My mother tried to fix it quietly, but maybe quiet wasn't enough." The crowd watched, transfixed. Evelyn's father, seated near the front, looked away in embarrassment. Daniel continued, "Mara Green, your mother's name, Eliza Green, will be restored publicly today. And every document, every record bearing my family's name will carry hers alongside it. That's the only way to make this right." He turned to the priest. "Father, may I?" Father Thomas nodded gravely. "Go on, my son." Daniel took the locket from the altar, opened it once more and pressed his signature beside the final line of Lydia Harcourt's letter, the same place his mother had left blank years ago. The gesture was simple, quiet, but the symbolism struck like thunder. Mara covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. The room erupted, not in applause this time, but in awe. Evelyn stared, pale and trembling. "You're destroying everything. Do you know what you've done? The investors, the board." Daniel turned to her slowly. "They'll recover. But integrity won't if I keep lying," she scoffed. "And what now? You'll marry her? The maid with the locket?" The church froze. Mara's eyes widened. Daniel said nothing, only looked at her, long and quiet. Then softly, "Right now, the only thing I need to do is apologize." He stepped closer to Mara. "Not as a man with a name. Just as someone who's finally seeing you clearly." She tried to smile, but her voice cracked. "You don't owe me that either." "Maybe not," he replied, "but I owe it to myself." The priest smiled faintly, that kind of smile that sees more than words. "Perhaps redemption is best written not in vows, but in choices." At that moment, the heavy church doors opened again, reporters pushing through, flashes strobing like lightning. The man from before, the one who'd been filming in the back, stood at the threshold. "Mr. Harcourt!" he called out. "One question." Did you know your family made Mara's mother sign a false confession? Gasps sliced through the air. Father Thomas turned sharply. What are you saying, son? The reporter, young, nervous, but determined, lifted his phone. Court records from 30 years ago. The Harcourts accused Eliza Green of embezzlement when the company nearly collapsed. But according to the archives, she was never charged because she'd already paid off the debt herself. The crowd broke into chaos. Murmurs. Outrage. Evelyn's father paled visibly. That's slander, he hissed, but the reporter stepped forward, undeterred. It's not slander if it's true. I have the documents. The priest said the letter mentioned a debt of honor. This was it. They destroyed her reputation to save their own. The revelation landed like thunder inside a cathedral. Daniel's knees nearly gave way. My father did that? Father Thomas closed his eyes. Then your mother's silence wasn't cowardice. It was mercy. The reporter's voice lowered. And now the world will know the truth. It'll be everywhere by sundown. Cameras clicked like the heartbeat of justice itself. Evelyn took a step back, tears smudging her mascara. This isn't fair. I didn't know any of this. Father Thomas's gaze softened. Then maybe, child, today was never meant to punish you, only to free you from a lie you didn't create. Mara stood still in the storm, her tears drying into something steadier. My mother used to say truth doesn't shout. It just waits to be heard. The priest nodded. And today it was. Daniel turned to Mara, eyes full of something unspoken. Then let's make sure her story is told. Properly this time. She nodded once, a small gesture, but enough. Outside, the bells began to ring again. Not the triumphant wedding peals they'd rehearsed, but something softer, slower, like an old promise being kept at last. And as the camera crews rushed to broadcast the moment, one detail caught the light on the altar, the silver locket resting between two open Bibles, glinting like it had been waiting all these years for someone to finally notice it. People would debate for weeks what really happened in that church, whether it was fate, faith, or poetic justice. But those who were there would remember only the sound, the moment the truth rang louder than the vows. If this story reminded you that truth doesn't need power, it just needs proof, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Have you ever seen someone judged by their class, their clothes, or their silence, only to rise with the truth on their side? Tell us in the comments below. Your story might inspire our next tale of courage and justice. And here's a little challenge for the sharp-eyed viewers. There's a subtle moment around Minute 7:18. When Father Thomas adjusts his glasses right before the reporter enters, that quietly hints he already knew what was coming. Watch again and see what he looks at on the altar before the chaos begins. Only the most observant viewers will notice what that glance truly meant. Because in this church, every silence was a confession.